This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solitska and today I am joined by Matt Bawler, who is Head of Early Years and Wellbeing at the Villa School and Nursery. Thank you very much, Matt, for joining again. I know you were on the Voice of Early Childhood podcast already previously, so it's great to have you back.
Pleasure. It's great to be back. I love your discussions. Whenever I'm following the other ones you're posting, there's so many things. I'm just like, yes, it's brilliant.
Yeah, always kind of lots of reflections to take away. And this is certainly going to be an episode where there's lots of deeper kind of discussion, reflection, and then practical elements to take away as well. So today we're talking about mental health.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So children's mental health, but not how we normally do. We're really specifically discussing proactive mental health and the fact that it all starts with early years. So this is really your kind of area of interest currently. So let's begin with asking the question, unpicking proactive mental health. What do you mean by proactive mental health, and why is it important to switch the narrative to this?
Oh, I mean, how long have we got? I would talk for days about this. I just think that generally when we think about mental health, we tend to naturally interpret that as mental ill health. And the idea that when someone has I would say our society is still largely following quite a reactive model. So we tend to wait until someone has a problem before we then step in and try to do something about it, more in a kind of trying to fix or undo way, which in my mind is kind of a bit too late in the process, really. It's very important, but it's like firefighting, or the way I would describe it is a bit like trying to teach someone to swim when they're already in the middle of a tsunami. It's too late in the process to be doing that. And so what I advocate for is a much more proactive approach to mental health, where before things have really become an issue, what can we do to provide people with the tools, not just to be able to cope when problems come, because they will, it's life and we know that, but also what can we do to provide children with tools and skills to be able to thrive well beyond that? So proactive mental health is looking at, rather than waiting, what can we be doing, particularly in the early years, because the first 5 years, even just looking at neuroplasticity of the brain, that is the formative years when so many neural pathways and the kind of foundational structures of the brain are being formed, that is the time we want to get in there with that habitual thinking, so that children are well prepared and well on their way. When for those of you that don't know much about neuroplasticity of the brain, between 0 and 5, the brain's ability to flex and change and learn new things is at 95%. So it's so movable and it can take new things on very quickly. But from 6 onwards, that drops to 65%. And, we can learn new things throughout our life discourse, but the amount of effort it takes to change is a lot more. So that's why getting in early is really important. But also, children don't, and adults actually don't naturally know how best to respond to things straight away. It's about providing the tools. And sorry, I know I'm waffling already. One of the books very early on in my journey that I read by a guy called Alain de Botton, there's a book from the School of Life called An Emotional Education, and it challenges what we deem as teachable. And it talks about how our education system is incredible, the way that we've taken things that have taken people years to figure out and learn, we can now teach in a matter of days or hours or weeks. But actually, when we look at what we deem teachable, largely emotions, the ideas of mental health are not really taught. And he challenges that and says, well, why not? So yeah, that's a very quick dive into proactive mental health in terms of getting in early and before.
Yeah, so very much like you mentioned earlier, so not having that reactive response model that we currently have. It's almost like, I guess I kind of see it almost like as that medical model of disability versus like a social model. Really thinking about, this is, let's not say like, oh, all these things that are wrong, and let's just focus on all the things that a child cannot do. And all the problems. Actually, let's focus on where the child is at, what they're really good at, and then how can we support them. So I guess it's kind of starting from there, but that means starting early, because then you don't have all these kind of issues to fix, I guess, or because they do already have the tools that they're equipped with, like you say, those tools that you've the kind of the practical tools that have been taught to them. But also, I guess, starting early by thinking, what did we get wrong in the first place? What's creating these mental health difficulties? So looking at
like
the
reverse engineering.
adults, and thinking, where do all these issues stem from? And looking at ourselves as adults, especially parents and obviously educators as well, and thinking, are there some things that we say or do, and maybe subconsciously, that are not really good for children's mental health?
Yeah, I mean, it's that, you saying that's reminding me of that Desmond Tutu quote about the there comes a time when we need to stop pulling people out of the river, and actually some of us need to go upstream and try and work out why they're falling in the first place. And I think there is something to be said for reverse engineering and thinking about, well, what ideally could people have done with earlier in the process that would have helped them a little bit more. And I think there's a lot to be said for educational priorities in the way that, if you take the early years curriculum, the foundation stage in terms of the 7 areas of learning, personal, social, emotional development is a prime area, and maths and literacy are not. And yet, how often, if you go into a setting, do you see the priority, and actually maths and English are really pushed, and maybe that personal, social, emotional is not? And I think sometimes we rush too quickly at the detriment of getting the foundations right. I mean, when you talk about Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow has this idea that there are certain foundational needs that need to be met first before we can reach those higher levels of self-actualization. And again, in this proactive model, I think sometimes we dive too quickly into teaching and learning, when actually what we need to be doing is really establishing those strong foundations. The lowest level is your physiological needs being met, which, in this day and age is increasingly a big issue in terms of food, shelter, warmth, love, your sense of attachment, getting those things in right. But then your psychological needs also being met first. I'm reminded of, this was years ago now, but one of the children that really set me off on this journey was girl called Nyla, one of the most beautiful but most challenging children I've ever taught in my life. This was in nursery. And, she would be effing and blinding and throwing chairs most days and looking to really hurt people, and a lot of anger. But I mean, she's such a gorgeous child. And whenever we did story time, and I was reading a story about whether a character was loved or not, she would stop and be absolutely spellbound, and you could not move her from that spot until she knew whether the character at the end of that story was loved or not. And I realized that deep down, she believed that she was not lovable. And, she had a lot of stuff going on at home, and she had this deep belief that she was not lovable. And so I realized there is no point in me trying to teach you anything until I look to meet that foundational need. And that's what really led me into exploring Maslow. And, and this idea of actually foundationally, we need to be building into children proactively these things that are going to enable them to be in that place, not just to learn. Life is not just about this kind of, pushing you through to reach some academic goal, but more in that broader sense of thriving in life. When Maslow talks about self-actualization, he's not just talking about passing a test, he's talking about thriving. And that's where I think proactively we can be much better with children at giving them, first of all, giving them those foundations for what they need, but then in that next level is giving them the tools, giving them the agency. And I think we could do a lot to move away from, would you call it like the cotton wool parenting or education, this idea of protecting children, it's not just a case of trying to give them everything and protecting them from the world. That's not actually serving them. And the more that we can equip them, children need to fall over so they know what it is to get back up again. It's like that thing from Batman, why do we fall? So that we can learn what it is to get back up again. And I think we can teach children and empower children to be able to do things for themselves. And that is much better than this kind of top down, let me tell you what to do. It's more getting alongside children. And that's where early years practice, I think, could teach higher up primary and secondary a lot, because I think we do get alongside the child. And we co-regulate, as Monet is always talking about, the idea of that co-regulation, working towards self-regulation, supporting and giving children the tools so that we can increasingly step back and they can do it for themselves, which goes right up into adulthood.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it all starts early, as you say. And I guess it's about really understanding each individual child, to understand them and why they are doing certain things, so then we can understand how to support them, rather than thinking, that they are being difficult. Actually, they are struggling with something, and always seeing it like that. A child displaying a certain behavior. What can we learn from this? What is behind this behavior? Straight away kind of thinking that then obviously there's a need there. We need to support it before thinking this child's being difficult, and then trying to potentially obviously find out because then there's there might be triggers involved. So you do need to know in order to be able to support the child. Obviously there's ways of supporting children that display similar behaviors that are going to be kind of the same tools that you can use as an adult, but knowing exactly that child's, I guess, background and story will allow you to support them in a more kind of specific way to them.
It's so
co-regulate together.
I think that is it. I'm encouraged that we are heading in the right direction, where we're moving away from seeing behavior as something to be managed. When a child is dysregulated, previously years ago, I think that the temptation would be to be like, well, what can I do to stop this? What can I do to stop this child being angry? Or what can I do to fix it and stop this child being sad or upset? And I think we're slowly shifting more to a thing, as you say, of going, well, being a almost emotion detective of thinking, well, what lies behind this, and how can I use this as a way of empowering the child rather than doing it for them? How can I help them to understand why they're feeling angry? There's no such thing as a bad emotion, and I think children really need to understand that anger is really important, and sadness is vital, and we need to feel those things, because they're like messages. They're like, what can we learn from this? And I totally agree with you that we need to shift this idea of behavior being something that we respond to, and more use that as a message for something that lies behind. And how can we use this as a way of empowering this child to grow and thrive and become more of who they want to be? Because so often, particularly those children that shout the loudest, they're often the ones that actually need that element of being able to process what they're feeling and have the safety. I think when children know that you're not going to jump in and try and pacify or I'm trying to think of the right word, where you honor their feelings, I think is really important. Where you sit and you go, tell me about, what are you feeling? Talk to me.
Let's give them space and time to feel those feelings and express them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sad thing about education now is time, isn't it? And I think we're always in a rush to get places, and I think actually the value of taking the time is an investment that comes back tenfold. And I think sometimes we could be better in terms of doing instrumental or longitudinal teaching rather than intrinsic. So rather than responding to the immediate, I need to get you to do this, it's more thinking, well, actually, if I took the time now, yes, this is stopping me from achieving my objective for this morning.
Targets,
but actually, in the long run, you are going to be in a much better place for learning, and I will get way more learning out of you down the line because I've actually sat with you and taken this time.
Hi, it's Angelica here. Thank you all for listening in. I'm here to ask for a quick favour from the early years community. In order for the Voice of Early Childhood to continue creating free, valuable content and sharing voices, we need your help. Please hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening on. And if you are listening on a podcast platform, then check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can not only listen, but also watch the podcast and really focus in on the discussions. Or if you are viewing on YouTube already, remember that you can also find us on 19 different podcast platforms. Simply search for The Voice of Early Childhood and subscribe to get a brand new episode every Monday morning, ready for your morning commute or however you start your week. And as always, do share the podcast with colleagues, friends, and parents of young children. We have a lot of interested parents and family members listening in and reading the articles. So let's ensure more of them can access the free content. Let's encourage them to engage and keep these thought-provoking discussions going. Enjoy the rest of the episode. And it goes back to like the priorities are wrong, aren't they? In terms of like when you said we focus on literacy and maths rather than personal, social, emotional development, even though that is a prime area. And I guess we need to be focusing on personal, social, emotional throughout the entirety of a child's and a person's life.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just, and it's not just those first. So the prime areas where we focus on them, you know, when the child is up to 2-3 years old, where that's kind of the main focus before we start looking at literacy, maths, expressive arts, knowledge of the world, etc. If those foundations, you know, those emotional, social foundations are not there, not met by 4, we don't just push the maths on them. We need to go back, don't we? And that's what we always need to do, is that view that if a child is just not developmentally ready, that's the most simplistic way of looking at it, I guess, but it should be that this child needs your support, you know, emotionally. That should be the priority. And when you said about not just pacifying the child, calming them down and getting them to stop the behavior or stop crying because you don't want them to be sad, it's exactly what we do as adults, you know, to each other when we say don't cry. Oh God, like that is just such an awful thing to say. You know, this is why men really struggle with mental health, and we have this mental health crisis because, you know, for years, for decades, we've heard, in inverted commas, men don't cry, men shouldn't cry, or boys don't cry. And this is why I really love the brand Boys Get Sad too, actually. They're doing a lot of work around men's mental health, but it's all about, even like I was saying at the start, so subconsciously some of the things that we say as adults or do may actually be really negative. When we say, oh, don't cry, or I don't like it when you cry, or stop crying, it's okay. Yes, it is okay. You can open up to me, but don't tell them to stop crying. Actually let it out, let those emotions out. So that those are the kinds of things that I think we say to children, to other adults, with all the best intentions, but actually it's saying stop crying, don't cry, we don't do that, we need to stop this crying, we need to cheer you up, and we need to bottle those feelings and forget about them because they're negative and they need to go away.
Yeah, it's such a, I think the language we use really matters. And it so often it starts with us, as you said, with adults and how we speak to ourselves. I think becoming aware of our own internal monologue sometimes of how we speak to ourselves, and then be, and then think, how we speak to children. And we model, children learn more from observation than anything else, and they observe how we are with each other, how we are with ourselves, and that's where they pick up those foundational habits. And I think so much when I'm running training for parents or teachers, I'll often talk about the notion of like when you get on a flight and the safety message says about if the oxygen mask comes down, be sure to put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. And I think so often, particularly in our field of work, we're working with young children, it's very easy to be like, well, I just want to give and give and give and give. And as parents, I think there's this pressure of I need to give. And it's like, well, actually put your own oxygen mask on first. Like, what are you doing for your own sense of mental health, for your own well-being, proactively, not waiting until you're in crisis, but what are you doing to be able to give yourself the time and the things that you need, because you will be more effective. And that is, in terms of language, and the language that we use for ourselves matters, because that's the language that we ultimately use with others. So it's important that there's kind of three areas of what I have developed. I mean, it's not groundbreaking, but it's the stuff that I've pulled together was more. I just back in the early days of when I was first looking at this. I mean, I started off teaching. Before I became a teacher, my background was theatre, and I was working in secondary schools. And, I was going in, doing theatre and education, addressing issues such as like self-harm, eating disorders, that kind of thing. And it was making a big difference. And so many people were coming forward saying, I've never told anyone this, but this has happened. And it was really good. But it just bothered me that it was almost too late. We're saying about this, like seeking to undo. And so I became a primary school teacher and was teaching Key Stage 2 initially. But again, I very quickly realized so much of what we're doing is trying to sort of undo things that are already very embedded. And so, I was teaching Key Stage 1 and was like, still actually, no, there's still so much coming through that is really, habitually embedded, which took me down to early years. And I just started to explore how, actually within these first 5 years, what are some of these foundational things that actually really have a lifelong impact, not just for now in your engagement now, but as you grow up. And so I read just, like psychology, psychotherapy, child development, all these different things, and sort of started to try and pull some stuff together. And I felt like, actually, within the sort of strands of child development, I would say that all of those things can kind of be brought down for me under three sort of main areas of self-esteem, character, and resilience. So self-esteem, that element of how I see myself. Character is like the tools for how I engage. So how do I engage with my world around me, but also the tools for how I engage with myself? Because our internal world is a mystery, and we need the tools to engage with that. And then resilience is the kind of how I respond to challenge and setback. And again, the tools for when something goes wrong, how do I deal with that? And essentially, when I teach it to the kids that I work with, I teach it as I am, I can, and I will. It's those sort of three areas. But it's trying to break it down into a manageable way, because as early as practitioners, we do not have a lot of time, because we're constantly responding to what's in front of us, and you never really know what's going to happen on it. I mean, I love it. But, to the outside eye, they're like, how do you do that? I think, early as practitioners need a medal, because we are constantly like, woo, 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 diving in and out. And actually just having a very simple framework, I think, is handy, rather than having too much. Just having I've kind of got these concepts of self-esteem, character, and resilience. And whenever I'm working with the children, I've always got that in the back of my head. So self-esteem, that element of how I see myself, we can be building that up in kids constantly by the way that we help them frame their stories. So when self-esteem is built up by repeated experience. So you can't just tell someone, and they'll automatically take it on. They need to experience it practically several times. And I think that it's basically the difference in psychology between Adler and Freud. So Freud would argue that how you see yourself is a direct product of everything that has happened to you in your life. And Adler disagreed. So Adler said it's not what has happened to you that has made you develop how you see yourself. It's the story that you chose to take from what happened, that you've taken on this story. And I think that's really powerful for children. It's not what happens to them in these repeated experiences. It's the story it's the interpretation of it and what that means for them. So for me, when I was very young, a teacher said to me in a maths context, they said, "Oh, you're much better at writing and reading than you are at maths." And I just immediately I think what they were trying to say is you've got a real strength in reading and writing, but I interpreted that as you're rubbish at maths. And so the story that I took from that is I'm bad at maths. And so for the rest of my education, I just instantly shut down. Whenever it came to maths, I was like, oh, I'm bad at that. There's no point in me trying, because of the story. And I think as practitioners, we can be encouraging children to go off on adventures. When we have them on the carpet, the way I describe it is a bit like sailors in the harbor. You're safe in this harbor, and then it's like, right, at activity time, off you go out onto the ocean, have adventures, have scary adventures, have great adventures. Now come back and tell me what happened just now. Tell me about your adventures. And what I can do is help them frame that story by going, wow, gosh, you were really brave there. Wow, you could really start to say, I am brave, and just that little bit of dripping in. But another time when that child does something else, you can go, wow, you were really brave there. They start taking on this notion of I am brave, and that I am, how I see myself. And we can play a big part in helping children to frame how they see themselves with these internal I am statements. So I'm just aware I am waffling, please.
No, it's great to see how passionate you are about this. It actually reminded me of the previous podcast episode, you talked about affirmations, didn't you? And that's how you supported your children and, giving them these positive affirmations of themselves, which is this example, because I don't know how much we unpicked it in that other episode, but I'm constantly kind of always confused with that notion of affirmations, because I hear it too much in terms of mental health and these other podcasts and, directed at adults more so, to say, like, look in the mirror and say, I'm brave, I'm beautiful, I'm this, I'm that, I'm clever. And actually, if you don't feel it, or if you've not done anything, or if someone else says it to you and you're like, but I don't feel that, or why have you said it? It feels almost fake or tokenistic, or just, they're saying it to make you feel better. Whereas I think I saw something on Instagram earlier from I think it was Jay Shetty's podcast, and someone was saying about how do we build confidence, and it's not just about giving praise all the time. Actually, it's about building competence and then giving that praise. That's really reminded me of what you just said, because you're saying you're great at this because you just did this, and they can see that evidence.
Yeah, it's for the reason. It's helping them to understand the why, and it's also getting them into the notion that self-esteem can be earned rather than that. So I always talk to the kids about, you can't just be something straight away. So say, like we were just saying about brave, you don't just suddenly go turn the corner and I am brave. I talk about a little bit is what the phrase we use is start by doing it a little bit. And this phrase, the kids will do it with each other now, which is great. They'll just be like, a little bit. And what that means is that they know that if there's something that they want to be able to say about themselves, they don't just start saying it, they start by doing it a little bit. And so being brave starts by doing it, not like, yes, I'm brave. It's just like, just start by doing it a little bit. What tiny little thing could you do? Just that little bit. And then the more you do it, a little bit, it starts to feel real. And it starts to feel like, actually, I can genuinely say this about myself. Like you say, it's not one of these cheesy affirmations that I'm trying to convince myself. I feel it in my core. And I think, that's where we need to really distinguish between, there's two things I'd actually say about this. So in the 70s, particularly in America, but it was in this country as well, there was this big push towards the, what do they call it? It was like the great self-esteem experiment. And they decided that they needed to just tell kids that they were brilliant. They needed to it was almost like you were praised for breathing. It was just like, you're amazing. You're the best. Go, you're the best. And actually what they found is that was detrimental. It didn't, because people didn't believe it, because they were praised for breathing, it had no meaning to it. And actually self-esteem needs to be earned in a way where you build it so it has meaning for you. The other thing I'd say is I think we need to also be shifting away. There's a big difference between positive self-esteem and high self-esteem. And I think sometimes the danger is that, particularly in parents, they can tell their child, you're the best, you're amazing, and actually that's high self-esteem. And actually that's different from positive self-esteem, which is much more egalitarian, where it's, we all matter. We all are, have positive traits. And I think it's dangerous sometimes to be trying to make someone feel like they're the best in the world, because the reality is you're not. And you will always have situations where you're not. And actually what happens is that's false self-esteem then. And actually it's also self-esteem that puts others down. And I think what I would argue is what we want is real positive self-esteem that builds a sense of agency. It builds this sense of, I am capable, I think is the thing. I think where affirmations have potential are things where it's more like reminders. So rather than things that are affirmations about who I am, they're more clocking in reminders. So I think, last time we spoke was where I was talking about the resilience strand of what I do, which is very much the growth mindset aspect of how I respond to stuff. And sometimes that's where I think sometimes having these phrases that we remember can really help, because when when something goes wrong, the amygdala in our brain instantly kicks into fight, flight, or freeze mode. It's damage limitation. And what happens is that is shutting off your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus. So your access to logical thinking and your access to memory gets shut down, because your brain is going into, do I need to fight, or do I need to run away, or do I need to be still and pretend, hope it will go away mode? And what you need is these phrases that will kick in, that will remind you. And so things like, it's not, I can't do it. You say, I can't do it yet, or mistakes are great, or we love a challenge. When you get something wrong, how do we model that for children, that actually mistakes are great? When something goes wrong, that's brilliant. That shows that you're getting closer to where you want to be. And I think that is where having these kind of embodied phrases is really powerful. And again, through repeated experience, they become even more so. So the idea of saying mistakes are great, I hated making mistakes, and I still find it hard. But with every time that I go, do you know what? Actually, hang on a minute. No, mistakes are great. What can I learn from this? What can I take? And that moves me forward. And I think that's very powerful for children to move away from. There's an interesting thing at the minute where I feel like a lot of the stoicism, the sort of stoic stuff is starting to come back, which I personally think is a good thing, where for a long time, there's been this real push with social media that the purpose of life is to be happy. And I think
and
actually
find your
sometimes,
purpose, find your happiness in something in particular as well.
yeah, and I think sometimes that can be not always that helpful. I think happiness is really great, but if you make that as the sole purpose, sometimes actually no one is happy all the time. And actually, I think just shifting it slightly to being this idea of growth over happiness, I think it still honors this idea that, of course, who doesn't want to feel good and feel happy? It's really important. But actually honoring growth over happiness actually builds this sense of more, I think, what it feels to be alive and what it feels to thrive, where sometimes that actually doing things that are not going to be pleasant actually will ultimately get you to a place of feeling good about yourself. And I think that's where resilience could almost do with a bit of reclaiming, because I think a lot of people, when you say the word resilience, they balk at it. And I understand why, because it's almost been misunderstood and misused, where resilience has been used in a kind of just shut up and take it way. Like resilience is, I'm going to keep putting more and more on you and you should just take it. And that's not what resilience is. Resilience is about agency. It's about going, actually, I don't need to take this. I can have agency and control over this. And I'm not just going to just put up with it. So, yeah, I feel like that could do with a bit of reclaiming somehow.
Yeah, that really reminded me, which is what I've just got off my bookshelf, is you speak about resilience a lot. So maybe you've read this book. It's Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus.
I don't know it.
So I started reading it 2 months ago, and I kind of almost finished, and then I went back and I'm kind of taking notes. It says, so Do Hard Things, Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. So he talks about the key messages so far that I've got from it, similar to kind of what we were saying. So understanding and navigating rather than simply powering through and pushing down. So powering through something and pushing feelings down, I guess. And really, really love this, processing through rather than powering through. So you're going through that process.
I love that.
Yeah, rather than just power through it. Actually, no, you need to understand what's going on here. Listen to your body, listen to your mind, rather than let's just get head down and power through. And then talks about tougher individuals are able to perceive stressful situations as challenge rather than a threat. So challenge is difficult but manageable, threat, something to survive. So seeing things as difficulties, but they are manageable. I can work through this rather than, oh God, this is too hard, I can't do this kind of thing.
I need to get that book.
Yeah, you'll need to get this.
That is 100% what children need, is trying to just shift away from this kind of Deliveroo culture, this kind of, if I can't get something straight away, then it's not worth me doing. The kind of hole in one has been wrongly sold to children and to adults, actually. The idea that we should be able to just get something like in golf, like a hole in one. And the reality is, it does happen, but very, very rarely. The reality is actually to get something takes several attempts. And it's that moving forward, and that's what we want for our kids, is that notion of loving a challenge, going after hard things. And I think that actually does play a big part in mental health. As that book just says, do we see something as a threat or a challenge? Massively impacts how your brain fires, how your body feels, and again, that element of, do I push things down, head in the sand, or do I go, no, actually, this isn't something to be afraid of. Let me unpick it. And, that goes into a lot of the character stuff, I think, where the character element is about tools and about, particularly say the tools for internal, how I understand myself and my internal world. It can feel a bit like a washing machine or a big ball of string inside sometimes. And actually going, I could push this down and just go, or I could take it out in front of me and unpick it and look at it and understand what it is that I'm feeling. And that is so much more helpful as we go back to earlier. Stop crying, or no, cry, like feel, what are you feeling? Where did that come from? Why are you feeling that? I think that is the tools that we can model on a daily basis for children.
Yeah. And not seeing emotion and crying as, in quotation marks, as being soft or weak, and actually making sure that it's not about saying, oh, actually you're encouraging this child to cry all the time, and then if anything happens they cry and they fall over, they cry, and actually it's about what do we do with that moment and what do we teach them in that moment, not just it's okay to cry, always cry kind of thing. What can we learn from that emotion, and what can we do
growth.
with it?
Definitely. And that's where we want to bring parents on board. I think as early as we could be better, I think, at building that triangle of like child, parent and setting, so that we learn together, so that it isn't this notion of, the child is the learner and we're the experts. I think the more that we can shift to the idea of lifelong learning, that as parents, as educators, as children, we're all learning and we do this together. And these phrases that I've just talked about, that's for adults. We all grow in that. And it's how are we moving forwards, and how can we accept each other where we're at and look at how can we use that as a way to grow even more, rather than a place, what you said right at the start about, rather than coming at it from a place of deficit and what's wrong with you. I love the elements of positive psychology that I love is shifting the narrative to, well, actually, what's right with you? What's going great? And what can we grow? And, we're talking about positive psychology and character tools. I love what Martin Seligman has developed around the idea of, he explored character strengths like tools and discovered, he did this experiment across the world in multiple settings with different socioeconomic groups and ages and everything around. They found 24 character strengths or tools that are present in everybody, but to differing degrees. And everybody will have character strengths. There'll be like a top, 5, if you like, but actually everybody has all of the tools. And I think sometimes we forget that, often we say, oh, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, and I'm not good at that. And actually it's almost said in a way that like, I don't have that ability, but it's not actually. Yeah. We have the ability to do all of them, but like I describe it to the kids like a tool belt. So we talk to the kids constantly about using your tools, whether it's risk taking, whether it's teamwork or whatever. It's like, how can you use your tools in this situation? But it's getting them to understand that there are certain tools that you're used to using that are like your go-to tools that you use all the time. But actually, you've got a load of tools around the back that you can learn how to use that you have already. And that's where for children, it just builds their sense of self is that, actually, I've got all these things. Oh, I just need to learn how to use them. I think can really empower them a lot.
That is such a lovely analogy. I could just see like children seeing themselves as like superheroes.
Honestly, it's the most heartwarming thing, because we've been doing this for sort of 5-6 years now. It's the most gorgeous thing to see children doing it for each other or recognizing for themselves. So when we give praise, we've really deliberately tried to move away from sticker culture when you're kind of rewarding as an external reward, but more to that internal reward. So we're giving praise. We're really explicitly saying, wow, you used your tools there. I just saw you use your risk-taking tools. Well done. And saying how they did it. And they start to understand, oh, actually, I did use my risk-taking tools. I could use those again. And now they're starting to do it with each other. And it's so lovely because they'll go up to each other and say, oh, why don't you? Yeah. So risk-taking, for example, often at lunchtime, when there's, an unfamiliar food, one of the other kids will say, oh, go on, use your risk-taking tools. Just give it a go. Try it a little bit. Or with the resilience strand, the mistakes are great, or I can't do it yet. Constantly, it's so lovely to see children come up and encourage each other and say, hang on a minute, mistakes are great. What you just got wrong there, that's great. What can you learn from it? We love a challenge. Come on, I'll help you. And yeah, it's interestingly that's something that I'm reading a lot about at the minute. I think partly because of what's going on in our country at the minute in terms of some of the rioting that's been going on, is this trying to move away from othering and this idea of I think our culture has really pushed And to be honest, like, in terms of my I am, I can, I will, the sense of me separate to others. And actually, I feel like the we in the me is something that I'm really coming into as something that's really important. That yes, a sense of how I see myself is important, but that is within the context of we and us and how we see each other, and growing self-esteem in that sense of us. And with the, I'm slightly going to the side here in terms of talking about the writing and things that have happened at the minute, but moving away from this kind of othering of like banishing things that aren't acceptable into the who is it? Young talks about the forest and the clearing, how we have this kind of clearing where everything that we deem as acceptable is allowed in the clearing, and everything that's not acceptable we banish into the forest. And it doesn't go away; it's still there.
Yeah.
And I think as modeling the future society we want to see, I want us to be not banishing inappropriate or banishing people for bad behavior, as the way we would say with children. We see the behavior, not the child. We respond to the behavior, not the child. I think, as a society, we need to be better at that, at going, actually, we have an identity together. And in terms of the mental health of our country, the more that we can develop that with children, this idea of actually, there are behaviors that aren't necessarily great, but actually there is no shaming or pushing people away. That actually, as a togetherness, we want children to learn from each other. And yes, we make mistakes. Yes, we say unkind things sometimes. Yes, we do things that were really hurtful. But rather than banishing or telling off, how can we use that as a means of understanding why you felt that, and how can we then not just grow you, but how can we grow together? So that's kind of my heart for this proactive mental health, is long term, how will this actually not just impact individuals, but how will this impact society on a more global scale?
This reminds me of a book I saw yesterday on Instagram. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a children's book, and it was talking about the fact that we are all inherently good people, and even if we've done something bad, that doesn't mean we're a bad person. And that's what you say about kind of not banishing people for certain behaviors. And recently also I've been kind of talking to people about kind of prisons and punishment, and giving people the tools in their toolbox, a second chance, or understanding why they do certain things, and kind of having discussions that everyone's a good person, but then that's really difficult because if they committed an awful crime, would you really, if you were involved in that and it was someone close to you, of course you wouldn't think, oh, they're a good person, they just made a mistake. So I think it's just really things that are really difficult to unpick and process, but you're so right, all of this that we are talking about actually impacts and relates to the whole of society and not just children.
It's dialogue. It's talking and not shying away from the difficult conversations. And sometimes in a more child context, I think we do a disservice to protect children. I'm not talking about things that are adult related with children, but in a child context, sometimes actually children need to have space to be able to talk about grief and loss in a child way, which is where, as I think you just mentioned, children's stories. For me, I think that is one of the most important ways for children of being able to discuss things from a safe distance. So when sometimes for children, discussing it about themselves is too close. And actually to be able to explore issues, challenges, is best explored through a story, because it's a safe distance. You can be right up close to it. You can feel, you can feel all the feelings when we empathize, and, our theory of mind feels what the character's feeling, but from a safe distance. And that's where I feel like stories, I wish we made more time in early years and primary and secondary for sitting and reading and allowing things to come out of that safe place. And I can share, I've got like a link to a whole bunch of stories that link to all sorts of, not issues is the wrong word, but all sorts of mental health things to be able to explore with children. There are so many brilliant books now that will help you. Like Ruby's Worry, for example, exploring that, helping children to understand worry internally and how to externalize it and feel it, I think is brilliant. Jeffrey Gets the Jitters is one that my kids were obsessed with towards the end of last term, which they absolutely loved, which again is empowering children to understand what's going on and giving them the tools to practically be able to process difficult emotion, I think is hugely powerful for them. So I do think stories matter, and I think we could go a lot further in terms of using stories in that way, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the kind of practical tips and takeaways from this episode, using stories with children and looking out for books that are really great at supporting children's mental health, or that have that kind of narrative, that you can explore with the children. But throughout all of this episode, there are so many takeaways, that you've given, practical kind of elements in terms of those kind of, what did we call, not words of affirmation, is affirmation? No, what did we say earlier?
Well,
kind of saying, I am this, I am that.
I know. Yeah, I need to come up with a thing rather than affirmations. Like, what's because I mean, it's I guess it's that embodied agency is how I would describe it. It's rather than telling yourself it's reminding yourself of something that you genuinely have learnt to feel in a real way. So when you say I am, I can, and I will, those phrases are linked to experiences that you've had where there's this sense of, actually, I am. Hang on a minute. I am brave, or I am a risk taker. I can do this. Or that sense of, I can. Actually, hang on a minute. I can walk away from this situation, or I can use my tools to talk to this other child that's really annoyed me because he's just said something and I want to punch him. I could punch him, but I can use my tools because I know that will get a much better outcome of what I want. Or I will actually, hang on a minute. Yeah, I can't do this, but it's not, I'll never get to do it. I just can't do it yet. And that embodied sense of meaningfulness to it is what will be carried up through their primary years, their secondary years, and their adulthood. I think those foundations get built on, and a house is largely only as strong as its foundations, really. So the more that we can get those in now, the higher the building can go. So yeah.
I feel like you're full of really cool analogies and things for people to remember. It comes from like your theatre background, I think.
Probably, yeah.
All of your creativity.
When you get like mixed analogies, it's like, no, just come on, you need to stick to one, Matt. Come on, stop jumping.
No, I think it's great. Well, yeah, like I was saying, this episode just has so many takeaways, and I would say to all of those who are listening, just really reflect, re-listen to this episode, or, whilst you're listening for the second time, take some notes and really reflect on how you as an educator, as an adult, as a person, use language. How do you talk about, like you're saying, talk about yourself, your internal dialogue, how do you put your oxygen mask on first? And then how are you able to support children and other adults as well with their mental health? So, yeah, I think there's so many great takeaways.
It's a lot. I mean, I think it's okay. I can talk about it. So I'm currently writing a book for Routledge.
So exciting.
Which I'm really excited about. And very much what I want to do with the book is really have a big focus on the practical applications of it. So, within the areas that we've talked about today, I really want to sort of give the theory so that people really understand the theory behind this, but then really then go into, and this is how to do it on a daily basis, because it's all great having this theory, but if you can't practically do it when you're constantly responding to the children in front of you, you need something simple that works for you and for the kids. So yeah, hopefully that will come out next year. So that when that comes out, and I'm hopefully close to being able to sign a deal with some of my children's books. So I use my own stories a lot in terms of getting across the concepts that I teach. So I'm really, really hoping that will come through, because to be able to share that resourcing would be great as well. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, so many exciting things happening. So yeah, definitely everyone who's listening need to watch this space and kind of watch what Matt is doing. He's doing some amazing things. And like you say, with everything kind of being very much kind of practical and, you know, takeaways, and you've been reading so much into all of these important topics like you've been saying and sharing, and I know you said practicalities are really important, but also at the same time it's important to have that knowledge behind you. Obviously for you, as you're speaking about all these things and writing, but the people that you're sharing it with are not just saying do this, these are some great tips, but actually why am I doing this, you know, where's the discomfort,
how is it meaningful for me?
Yeah,
I mean, that is actually something that I think is really important. Is I don't want to do a kind of, here's the answers, this is the way, follow me, people. It's about doing it. It's partly about doing it together in community, and we do this together, all of us. And there are so many people doing amazing things, and it's how we can support each other. But as you said, it's also trusting your own wisdom and going, what does this mean for me? And what do I want to do off the back of this? And not just doing things by rote as, oh, I've been told to do this, but more a sense of, how do I interpret this, and how is that meaningful for me? Because it needs to be you that is going, I see this for myself. And practitioners need releasing, I think, a lot more. There are so many amazing practitioners in early years that just need that sense of someone going, you know what you're doing and you're amazing, like do it more.
Yeah, and this just reminded me, you know, of what you were saying in terms of, I guess we're both almost like saying, you've reminded me of this and you said this, you said that. That's quite funny how we're doing this, but building on what each other said. But what I always say is we need to be critical consumers of knowledge. So anything that we take in, not just saying someone told us, an expert, you know, he's told us to do this, we're going to do it. Actually thinking, okay, well, what does that mean for my children, the community that we're in? What does that mean for me as an educator? How am I going to use this? Like, you know, like you were saying, how am I going to use these tools? So always being critical and not just consuming all the time, because there's so much to consume now in the digital age.
100%. We could talk for days. I love this. You know, this is the great thing about chat. You know, I think I'm definitely going to need to get that book off you. And maybe like I know you said about like doing a little follow-up thing to post. I'll put in a whole bunch, because there's so many books that I've, you know, read recently, you know, like the Love and Nurture.
Oh yes, I've got that one.
That's amazing.
And Tamsin's
Permission
book,
to Feel. That's amazing. Mark Beckett. That's so good. This is absolutely brilliant. The Sue Roffey
Agency,
one.
Safety, positivity, inclusion, respect, equity.
Aspire. This has just come out recently, and it's absolutely fantastic for early years practice. Really, really good. I mean, there's so many. This one is more written for parents, but I think as practitioners, it's so useful. How the world is making our children mad and what to do about it. It's so, there are so many interesting and practical things in this. I would really recommend that a lot. But I could go on. There's so many
books. You clearly, like you said, you do so much reading. We'll definitely have a list linked to this episode that I think people will find that so valuable that they could it's always good to have that further reading and to be like so excited by something and be like, oh yeah, I want to delve into this more. So for everyone that's watching, listening, you can find Matt's article on the Voice of Early Childhood website. Link is in this episode description. But also, if you enjoyed this, then Matt has written an article and his previous episode that we mentioned, which is Growth Mindset in Early Childhood. So again, that's available on the Voice of Early Childhood website. And also a couple of other things that we mentioned, actually. So you mentioned, Matt, Dr. Minnie Jonkbayer on self-regulation. Yes, she wrote an article and did a podcast episode quite a while back on the Voice of Early Childhood, actually. So her work is there as well. And a recent one, because you mentioned rewards, like stickers and things like that. Dawn Jones, who's just recently done some research around this. Her article and episode just came out on problematizing behavior management systems, and there's a lot kind of to unpick there as well, and that's kind of linking here. So yeah, those who are listening, check those out as well. And yeah, so Matt, finally, thank you for sharing your knowledge, experience, and passion. It's so clear that you're so passionate about this, and thank you for sharing this reflective space with me as well, and all of the listeners.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll hear from you again soon, and in about a year's time or so, when your book publishes, will definitely be great to have you on again, or maybe even sooner.
Yeah, sounds great. I will very much look forward to it.